The city was alive with noise, bright lights, and the smell of smoke in the air. Merchants shouted about their goods, buyers argued over prices, and strange music floated through the streets. It was the grand market, a place where every species came to trade, gossip, and watch. But today, something else held the attention of the crowd. Near the center square, a ring of people had gathered, their voices sharp with laughter. They were not watching a performance, not listening to music, but mocking someone small and fragile. A girl, young and alien, stood in the middle of the circle, shivering, her thin arms wrapped around herself. Her clothes had been torn away, leaving her nearly bare, her pale skin marked with dust and bruises. Every laugh cut into her like a knife, and every stare made her shrink deeper into herself. Among the crowd was a human traveler, a man who had been passing through the city. After days of journey, he had come for supplies, maybe a place to rest, but now his steps slowed, his eyes locked on the scene before him. The laughter hit his ears, and the sight of the trembling girl struck something in his chest. She was too small, too weak, and far too young to face such cruelty. And yet no one lifted a hand to help her. The alien voices rose louder, mocking her for her weakness. "Look at her bones, she cannot even stand straight," one shouted. "She is useless. Nothing but trash." Another laughed. A handful of dust was thrown, landing on her hair and shoulders, making her cough softly. Her hands trembled, but she did not cry out. She only lowered her head as if waiting for it to end. The human clenched, his jaw. He had seen cruelty before, he knew how crowds could turn ugly, but this was different. There was no crime, no reason, just pure humiliation forced on someone too helpless to fight back. And worse, it was being done for entertainment. He felt the weight of his coat against his shoulders, thick and warm from the cold winds of his travel. The thought struck him. While he stood covered and safe, the girl stood with nothing, mocked and stripped. The difference burned inside him like fire. Still, he hesitated. The market was not his place. This city was not his home. And if he acted, the guards might come for him. But could he really turn away? Could he leave her there to be torn apart by laughter? The girl raised her head for only a moment, her eyes wide, searching the crowd for mercy. And then, for a single heartbeat, those eyes met his. They were not just the eyes of a stranger. They were a silent plea. "Please, do not leave me," they seemed to say. His hand tightened into a fist. The laughter around him grew louder, sharper, filling the air with poison. He looked at the crowd, at the sneering faces, then back at the girl who hugged herself tighter as if to disappear. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. It was not a decision made with logic or reason. It was simple human instinct. The human took one step forward. It was not loud. It was not a march. But the sound of his boot striking the ground seemed to cut into the laughter. Some turned to look at him, confused, their voices pausing. But he did not stop. He kept moving slowly toward the girl in the center. The girl noticed. Her eyes flickered. With surprise, her trembling lips parting as if she wanted to speak but could not. She was frozen between fear and hope, not knowing why this stranger moved toward her. The human's coat felt heavier now, as if it already knew what he was about to do. But still he walked step by step until he reached the edge of the circle. The crowd murmured, their amusement shifting into curiosity. "Why is the human stepping in?" One whispered, "Is he foolish? Does he not know the guards will punish him?" Another sneered. But the human did not answer them. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl. The girl shivered violently, her shoulders bare against the cold wind that swept through the market square. The human's chest tightened at the sight. It was wrong, all of it was wrong. And still no one acted. No one spoke against it until now. The laughter tried to rise again, but it was thinner this time, broken by unease. The human's presence was not loud, but it was solid, like a stone dropped into water, changing the ripples. And as he finally stood before the girl, the noise of the market faded in his ears. There was only her, small, shivering, and waiting for something she did not believe would ever come. He looked at her trembling form, and then he slowly pulled at the strap of his coat. The movement was simple, but in that moment it felt like rebellion. The coat was his comfort, his warmth, his shield, and soon It would become hers. The crowd did not yet know what he was about to do. The guards had not yet moved. But the girl's eyes widened with a flicker of hope as she watched the human's hands begin to remove his coat. The market of shame was no longer just a place of laughter. It was about to become the stage of defiance. The human stood at the edge of the circle, the noise of the crowd pressing around him like a wave, every face turned toward him, confused and mocking. But he did not move away. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl who shivered in the middle of the square. She was still hugging herself tightly, her thin shoulders shaking, her bare feet pressed against the cold stones. For a moment, he did nothing, only watched her. The crowd laughed again, thinking his pause meant weakness. "Look, the human only wants to stare," one voice jeered. "He will walk away like the others. Humans are cowards," another hissed. Their words cut through the air, but the human ignored them. His focus was only on the girl. She slowly lifted her head, her face pale and stained with dust. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes met his again, and in them he saw something that silenced the noise of the market. It was not just fear. It was not just shame. It was a question. "Will you leave me too?" Her eyes begged without sound. The human's chest tightened. He knew what he was seeing. He had seen it before. The eyes of someone at the edge, someone who no longer expected kindness. She did not ask with words because words had never saved her. But her silence spoke louder than a scream. It was a plea, a fragile hope wrapped in fear. The man's hand brushed over the heavy coat still hanging from his shoulders. He thought of how simple it would be to turn away. One step back, one twist of his boot, and he could disappear into the market. The crowd would forget him. The guards would not notice. He would leave with his supplies and his freedom. And she would be left behind like always. But that thought made his stomach turn. He had been silent before, in other places, when cruelty reigned, and he told himself it was not his fight. Each time the memory stayed sharp as a blade. He remembered the faces, the voices, the same silence in the eyes of others who begged without words. And now, here it was again, staring at him in the form of this trembling alien girl. If he walked away now, he would carry her eyes with him forever. The crowd began to jeer louder, sensing his hesitation. "Move along, human," a guard barked from the edge, his spear tapping the ground. "This is not your concern," another warned. But the girl's eyes did not leave his, and in them, he saw something else, something fragile, something almost broken, a spark that might die if he turned away. He drew a slow breath, the kind a man takes before stepping into a storm. The crowd's laughter tried to drown it out. But inside him, the decision had already been made. He was not going to walk away, not this time. He tightened his grip on the strap of his coat, feeling its weight as if it were waiting to serve a greater purpose. The girl shivered violently as a cold wind swept through the square. The dust in her hair lifted. The bruises on her arms showed clearly under the light. The human's jaw clenched. He imagined the journey she must have taken, the torment she must have endured. And still, she stood, her silence stronger than the laughter around her. Her silence was a weapon, a cry no one could hear except him. He stepped forward again, and this time the crowd noticed. A ripple of whispers spread, their eyes following him as he moved closer. Some laughed nervously, others frowned. "Foolish human," someone spat. But he did not slow. The girl's lips parted slightly, a shaky breath leaving her. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to beg him. But the words stayed locked in her throat. Her silence was her shield, but also her prison. She looked at the human as if waiting for him to betray her too. Would he laugh? Would he turn? Would he be just another face in the crowd? Instead, he stopped in front of her, close enough that his shadow fell across her small frame. The laughter dimmed. The market air grew heavy. The human's eyes held hers, steady, calm, unshaken. And though she said nothing, he understood. The plea was clear. "Help me, save me, please." The human felt the moment stretch like a string about to snap. Around him, the voices pressed, the guards shifted, the crowd leaned forward. Everyone waited to see what he would do. Would he turn his back like they wanted, or would he defy them? His hand moved to his coat, slow but sure. The crowd murmured, sensing the change. The girl's eyes widened slightly, her trembling slowing for just a heartbeat. She knew what was coming, though she could not believe it. The human loosened the strap across his chest, his coat sliding free. The heavy fabric shifted in the air, its warmth promising more than just protection from the cold. It was dignity, it was defiance, it was hope. And as he held it in his hands, the silent plea between them grew louder than all the voices in the market. The girl's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her eyes shining with tears that did not fall. For the first time, she was not just a target of laughter, not just an object of cruelty. She was seen, truly seen. And in her silence, she gave her answer to his choice. Her eyes whispered it back to him. "Thank you." The market of shame had turned into a stage of decision. The human now held more than a coat. He held the weight of defiance. And soon, the crowd would learn whether mercy could still exist in a place built on cruelty. The human's fingers tightened on the heavy coat, the sound of the market echoing in his ears like a distant storm. Every face in the circle leaned forward, waiting, whispering, mocking, curious. No one expected him to act. No one believed a human would dare. But in his chest, his heart burned with steady fire. The alien girl stood frozen, her thin arms wrapped around herself, her head lowered as if waiting for another cruel hand to strike. Her body trembled, and each tremor cut into him like a blade. He could feel the weight of her silent plea still pressing against his mind. And now, he knew exactly what he had to do. The human stepped closer, his boots firm on the cracked stone. The laughter of the crowd dipped into silence. The guards near the edge frowned, gripping their spears but not yet moving. They wanted to see what this strange human would try. The human bent slightly, the coat in his hands. And then he did the unthinkable. Slowly, carefully, he placed it over the girl's shoulders. The thick fabric slid across her skin, covering her frail form, hiding her shame, shielding her from the cruel stares. The moment was small, but it struck like thunder. The crowd gasped. The laughter snapped apart. Some shouted in anger. Others burst into shocked whispers. "Is he insane? Why would he protect her?" Someone barked. "He defies the guards, the market, all of us." Another spat. But still he stood firm, his hands steady as the coat settled around the girl. For the girl, the warmth of the fabric was more than just comfort. It was safety. It was dignity returned. She clutched at the edges with trembling fingers, her eyes wide, her lips parting in disbelief. For the first time in her life, someone had given instead of taking. Her shivering slowed, replaced by a fragile new strength. The human's voice cut through the air, calm but strong. "She is not yours to mock," he said. The words were simple, but in the silence of the square they rang louder than a shout. The crowd stirred, their faces twisting in anger and confusion. The guards stepped forward now, spears raised, their eyes cold. "This is not your affair," human one growled. "Leave the girl or face punishment," another barked. The human's jaw clenched, but his hands did not move from the coat he had given. He met their eyes with quiet defiance. "I will not leave her," he said. The girl pressed closer to the coat, hiding her face, but inside she felt something stir. It was hope, fragile as glass but alive. She had been mocked, stripped, treated as less than nothing. But now, this stranger, this human, had given her the gift of being seen, and the warmth of his coat felt like a promise that she was not alone. The crowd grew restless, shouts rising again. "Take him down," someone yelled. "Punish them both," another demanded. But the human did not flinch. He placed one steady hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her to stand behind him. His body was the wall between her and the rage of the market. The guards lifted their spears, stepping closer. The human's pulse quickened, but his stance stayed firm. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. He would not hand her over, no matter the price. The girl peered out from the coat, her small eyes filled with fear and wonder. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. She wanted to thank him, to beg him to run, to ask why he would do such a thing. But her voice failed. Instead, she held the coat tighter, clutching it as if it were life itself. The market had turned into a storm of voices. Some mocked, some cursed, some whispered about courage they had not seen in years. And still the human stood with the girl in his coat. It was a quiet rebellion, a single act of defiance against the cruelty of many. The guards raised their weapons higher, their shadows stretching across the stones. The human glanced at the girl, then at the streets beyond the crowd. He knew what had to come next. If he stayed, the guards would take her, and both of them might suffer worse than death. The only chance was to escape. The girl seemed to sense it too, her trembling fingers brushing against his hand. She looked at him with wide, desperate eyes, as if asking him to lead, to not let the coat be the only gift, but to give her freedom as well. He nodded once, the silent agreement passing between them like a spark. The guard shouted orders. The crowd surged forward. The human grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her close. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice low but firm. And then, with sudden force, he pushed through the crowd. Gasps and shouts followed, the circle breaking apart in chaos. The girl stumbled but held his hand tightly, her small frame hidden beneath his coat. The human moved fast, his path carving through the sea of hostile faces. The guards roared, chasing after them. The coat flared behind her as they ran, no longer just cloth, but a banner of defiance. The market square, once a place of shame, now echoed with the sound of their escape. And though the storm of anger followed, there was something stronger in the air, the beginning of hope, carried by one human and a trembling alien girl. The marketplace exploded into chaos. The human's bold act of covering the alien girl had broken the rhythm of cruelty, and now the crowd roared with anger and shock. Guards pushed through the mob with sharp cries, their spears gleaming as they pointed toward the fleeing pair. The human held the girl's trembling hand tightly, pulling her through the narrowest gap he could find. The girl stumbled, her legs weak from exhaustion and shame, but she clung to him with surprising strength. The heavy coat wrapped around her fluttered as they ran, dragging along the ground, a symbol of defiance that made the crowd hiss louder. "Stop them!" voices shouted. "The human dares to challenge us." Stones clattered on the ground behind them as someone hurled debris, but the human did not. Look back, they darted into a side street, the noise of the market muffling for only a moment. The alley was dark, filled with the stench of rotting food and damp stone. The girl coughed softly, nearly falling, but the human pulled her forward. "Stay with me," he muttered, his voice low, steady. She nodded quickly, though her breath came in sharp gasps. Behind them, the sound of armored boots thundered against the stone. The guards were fast, their voices barking orders as they split into groups to surround the alleys. The human's eyes darted ahead, searching, his mind racing for escape. The streets twisted like a maze, walls leaning close, shadows hiding both safety and danger. The girl's bare feet slapped against the ground, leaving faint marks of blood from cuts. The human noticed but could not stop, not yet. Every corner brought the risk of running straight into another squad of guards. The air grew heavy with tension, the smell of smoke drifting from a torch carried by their pursuers. The shadows on the walls danced, warning them of how close the hunters were. The girl stumbled again, her knees buckling, but the human caught her, lifting her small frame into his arms without slowing. She gasped, startled, clutching the coat tighter as her face pressed against his chest. Her voice was faint, broken, but it slipped out. Why help me?" The human's breath was rough, his legs pounding against the stone as he ran. "Because no one else will," he answered simply. She fell silent, her arms tightening around his neck. Her silence now carried something new, not just fear but trust. The kind of trust that came when someone had nothing left but still chose to believe. The sound of pursuit grew louder, the clash of metal against walls, the shouts of men spreading in every direction. The human turned sharply, into another alley, his eyes catching a narrow path between two crumbling buildings. It was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, but he forced his body sideways, the girl still clinging to him. The rough stone scraped against his arms, but he pushed through, emerging into another lane, darker and emptier. For a moment, the noise of pursuit seemed farther away. The girl lifted her head, her wide eyes shining with fear and wonder. She whispered again, her voice small, "They will catch us." The human shook his head, breathless but firm. "Not if I keep moving." She swallowed hard, nodding, as if his confidence was enough. To keep her heart beating, the lane sloped downward, leading toward the edge of the city. He could smell the sea, faint and salty, carried on the wind. Escape might be possible if he could reach the docks, but the guards knew the city better than he did. Every step was a gamble, every turn could end with steel at his throat. Shouts erupted again behind them. The guards had found the trail, torches flared, shadows stretched long across the walls. The girl gasped, burying her face into his chest again. The human's arms ached from carrying her, but he refused to set her down. Her weight was not a burden. It was a promise he had made the moment he gave her his coat. He turned another corner, the alley narrowing into sharp stone steps. His boots pounded down, the sound echoing into the night. At the bottom, the street split into three. To the left, faint light and noise from taverns. To the right, silence and shadows. Straight ahead, the smell of the sea grew stronger. The guards' voices grew closer again, their orders bouncing from wall to wall. The human chose the darkest path, pulling the girl close as he ran into the shadows. The alley swallowed them, the only sound their ragged breathing. The girl whispered, her voice shaking, "If they catch us, they will kill you." He did not answer at first, only tightened his grip on her. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but fierce. "Then I will take the risk because your life matters." The words struck her harder than the wind or the chase. No one had ever said her life mattered, not once. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently. She buried her face in his coat, her body trembling not from cold now but from something new. Hope. The human slowed only when the alley grew so narrow he had to press against the wall. He listened, his breath steadying. The guards' voices faded slightly. Searching in the wrong direction, the girl held her breath, her small hands gripping his shirt. Every heartbeat felt like thunder, but the silence held. After a long moment, he moved again, quieter now, stepping carefully. The city seemed endless, its alleys twisting like the veins of a living beast. But step by step he carried her deeper into the shadows, away from the voices of hate. The coat around her shoulders trailed like a banner, its warmth keeping her alive. The human's arms ached. His body burned, but he would not stop. He had chosen her and he would see it through. And as the night stretched on, the chase continued. Every corner, every shadow, every breath was a gamble, but together, they moved. One human carrying one alien girl, a fragile bond defying a whole city of cruelty. The human's steps were heavy, his breath rough, but he did not stop. The girl clung to him silently, her small frame wrapped in the coat, her head against his chest. The alleys twisted again and again, until finally at the city's edge, the noise of pursuit grew faint. Still he did not trust the quiet, not yet. He searched the shadows until his eyes caught a broken doorway, half hidden behind fallen stone. The building was old, abandoned long ago, its roof sagging and walls cracked. But inside, there was darkness, and darkness meant cover. He pushed through the doorway, ducking low, carrying the girl with him. The air inside was damp and cold, but at least no torches flickered, no voices echoed. He set the girl gently on the floor, her bare feet touching the dust. She winced softly, her body trembling, but she did not let go of the coat. Her fingers clutched it as if afraid someone might rip it away. The human knelt beside her, his hands rough but careful. "You are safe here, for now," he said quietly. The girl's lips trembled as if she wanted to answer, but her voice failed. Instead, she pulled the coat tighter, her eyes wet and shining. The man looked around the broken room. There was no furniture, only rubble and shards of wood, but in the corner, a pile of dry straw and broken crates lay scattered. He gathered them quickly, striking flint from his belt. A small spark caught, then a flame, and soon a faint fire burned in the darkness. The light spilled across the girl's face, revealing her bruises more clearly. Her skin was marked with lines of cruelty, shallow cuts and old scars. The human's jaw tightened, anger stirring again. How much had she suffered? How long had she been treated as less than nothing? The girl shifted closer to the fire, her small hand stretched toward it. Her eyes blinked slowly as the warmth touched her skin. She whispered at last, her voice fragile. "Warm." The human nodded. "Yes. Stay close. It will keep you alive." Her eyes flickered to him, studying his face as if she could not understand why he had done any of this. Minutes passed, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Outside, distant shouts echoed faintly, but none came close. For the first time that day, the girl's trembling slowed. Her breathing softened and her shoulders relaxed under the coat. The human sat across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. She watched him, her wide eyes reflecting the flames. Finally, she asked in a broken accent, "Why? You help me." Her words were slow, uneven, but they carried all the weight of her confusion. The human hesitated, then answered simply, "Because no one else did." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Her throat tightened, and instead she lowered her gaze, whispering, "I. No worth." The words stabbed at him. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "You are worth saving." She flinched slightly at his tone, not from fear but from shock, as if no one had ever spoken those words to her before. The coat slipped from her shoulder and he noticed more scars along her arm. He did not ask about them, not yet, but the firelight revealed a history of cruelty etched into her skin. The girl pulled the coat back up quickly, hiding herself again. Her eyes darted to his, searching for judgment but finding none. Instead, he pulled a small ration from his pack, a piece of bread and dried meat. He placed it near her, saying nothing. She stared at it for a long time, as if unsure whether it was truly meant for her. Finally, she reached out, her fingers shaking, and took the bread. She ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might be snatched away. Every bite seemed to fill her with both relief and fear. The human watched, silent, his heart heavy. Her hunger was not only for food but for kindness, for a place in a world that had cast her out. When she finished, she whispered again, "Thank you." Her voice so soft it was almost lost to the fire. He nodded once, not needing more. The night deepened, the fire crackled, and outside the wind howled. The girl curled closer to the coat, her body sinking into the straw near the fire. Her eyes grew heavy, her breaths slower, but even as she drifted toward sleep, her small hand reached out, brushing against his sleeve, as if making sure he would not vanish while she closed her eyes. The human stayed awake, watching the door, listening for danger, but part of him was watching her too. The way her breathing steadied, the way her face softened as the fire warmed her. She had been mocked and stripped, but now, for one night at least, she rested in safety. The coat lay across her like a shield, a symbol of defiance against a world that had tried to break her. And as the firelight flickered against the walls, the human knew the fight was not over. The city would not forget. The guards would not forgive, but as long as the girl clung to his coat, as long as she breathed beside him, he would not let them win. For in that broken shelter, with only a fire to keep them alive, something new had begun. Not just survival, but a fragile bond. The girl no longer sat alone in shame, and the human no longer walked the world untouched by cruelty. Together, they had become something different, two lives bound by a single act of defiance. And though the night was not yet over, the firelight promised hope, a hope worth fighting for. Morning crept into the broken shelter with pale light. The fire had burned low, only soft embers glowing now. The human sat against the cracked wall, his eyes half closed but alert. Beside him, the girl slept curled under his coat, her face calm for the first time since he had seen her in the market. She stirred slowly as the light touched her, her eyes blinking open. When she saw him still there, still watching the door, she let out a shaky breath of relief. For a moment she simply stared, as if afraid he would vanish if she looked away. But he gave her a small nod, and her trembling stopped. Outside, the city had already begun to wake. Merchants shouted, carts rattled, voices carried on the wind. But mixed with the usual noise was something sharper, something heavier. Rumors spreading like fire through dry grass. Whispers filled the streets, about the human who had stepped into the market of shame, about the alien girl wrapped in his coat. Some spoke with scorn, mocking him as foolish. Others spoke with anger, demanding punishment. And a few, hidden in quiet corners, spoke with wonder, as if something had been stirred in their hearts. The human heard it when he stepped outside to fetch water. Eyes followed him, voices hushed as he passed. A merchant muttered to another, "That's him, the one who challenged the crowd." Another hissed back, "He will not last long. The guards will see to that." The human ignored them, but the weight of their words pressed against him. Back in the shelter, the girl sat by the embers, clutching the coat around her. When he returned, she looked at him with wide eyes. "They know," she whispered in her broken voice. "They all know." He set down the water and nodded. "Yes, they know, but we keep moving." Her lips trembled. They will hurt you." He shook his head firmly. "Let them try." She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting the fabric of the coat. Her voice grew smaller. "Because of me." The human's eyes softened. "No, because of them. You are not the cause. You are the reason I stand." The girl blinked at him, tears forming. She wanted to speak again, but her throat closed. Instead, she pulled the coat tighter and leaned closer to the fire, hiding her face. The human said nothing more, but his presence beside her was enough. By midday, the storm of voices outside grew louder. Rumors had spread beyond whispers now, filling taverns and market stalls. Some claimed the human wanted to own the girl. Others said he sought to shame the guards. Each rumor twisted the truth, but all led to the same end: anger. The city was restless, waiting for him to fall. The girl felt it too, even within the shelter. Every distant shout made her flinch, every sound of boots outside made her clutch the coat. Finally, she whispered, Why fight for me, when all others hate?" The human looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because your life matters more than their hate." She stared at him, her lips parting. No one had ever spoken those words to her before. She had lived believing. She was nothing, believing every insult, every cruel hand. But now, with his voice, his coat, his defiance, she began to feel a crack in the wall built around her heart. Still, the storm outside grew stronger. By evening, shouts filled the air, angry voices calling for order, calling for punishment. The guards had not forgotten, the crowd had not forgiven, and soon the storm would break upon them. The girl pressed, close to him, her small hands gripping his arm, her voice shook. "They come." He nodded, listening to the sound of boots gathering in the streets. His hand rested on the coat draped over her, his jaw tight with resolve. "They will come." "Yes," he said. "But they will not take you." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear, and something else. "Why not leave me? Why not save yourself?" she whispered. The human shook his head slowly. "Because leaving you would mean losing myself." Her breath caught in her throat. The fire crackled faintly. And for a moment the storm outside felt distant, but only for a moment a heavy knock struck the broken door. The girl flinched, clutching the coat tightly around her small body. A voice barked, "Human, surrender the alien girl. She belongs to the city, not to you." The human rose slowly, standing between her and the door. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. "She belongs to no one." The silence after his words was heavy. The girl's eyes widened, her heart racing. The storm had found them at last, and soon it would break. But in that moment, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt seen, protected, and no longer alone. Outside, more voices gathered, the storm of hate swelling into a roar. Inside, one human and one alien girl waited by the dying fire. The coat wrapped around her shoulders, the promise of defiance unbroken. And though the storm raged louder, the bond between them grew stronger. For in the face of a city's anger, the girl now knew one human's heart could be greater than all their cruelty. The broken door rattled. Again, under the force of heavy fists, the voices outside grew louder, angrier, a storm waiting to burst. "Human, give up the girl," one guard barked. "You defy the law. You defy the city." Behind him, the crowd roared in agreement, their voices sharp with hate and fear. The human stood tall, his body shielding, the trembling girl who clutched his coat tightly. The firelight flickered across his face, casting shadows that made his stance seem larger, stronger. The girl's small hands gripped the fabric, her eyes wide and filled with terror. But when she looked up at him, she saw no fear, only resolve. The guards pushed against the door, the wood cracking under their weight. The girl whispered, her voice shaking, "They will take me. They will kill you." The human shook his head slowly. "Not while I stand." His words were calm, but the air around him burned with defiance. With a final crack, the door burst open, splinters flying across the floor. Guards poured into the shelter, their spears raised, their armor shining in the firelight. Behind them, the crowd pressed forward, jeering, shouting, their faces twisted with cruelty. The girl cried out softly, shrinking back into the corner, clutching the coat as if it were life itself. The human stepped forward, placing himself firmly between her and the mob. He spread, his arms slightly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Enough," he said, his words steady. "She is not yours to mock, not yours to strip, not yours to claim." The crowd fell silent for a moment. Stunned by his boldness, one guard snarled, "She is worthless, she is nothing." The human's eyes blazed. "She is not nothing, she is alive. She is someone, and she is under my protection." The girl's breath caught in her throat, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, someone spoke of her not as trash, but as a person. The words wrapped around her like the coat itself, filling her with warmth stronger than fire. The guards stepped closer, their spears glinting. The crowd began to shout again, voices demanding punishment, demanding blood. But the human did not step aside, his body firm, his voice louder than before. "You call her weak, but your cruelty is weaker still," he said. "You strip her, you laugh, you mock, but you fear the truth, that even in her silence she is stronger than you." The crowd wavered, their jeers faltering. Some faces turned uncertain, some lowered their eyes, but others shouted louder, unwilling to let go of their hate. The storm raged on, but the human's words had already struck like lightning. The girl clung to the coat, her heart pounding. She wanted to speak, to add her voice to his, but fear locked her throat. Instead, her silence carried her strength, her wide eyes fixed on him, and he, seeing her, felt his resolve harden even more. The guards raised their weapons, ready to strike. The human lifted his chin, his voice steady. "If you want her, you must go through me." The crowd gasped. The guards hesitated, a human alone, daring to stand against them all. For a heartbeat, silence filled the shelter. The fire crackled, the girl's trembling slowed, and in that silence, something shifted, not in the human, not in the girl, but in the crowd. Whispers spread. "He stands for her," one muttered. "He covers her with his coat. He risks death for her," another whispered. The storm of voices began to change, some softening, some questioning, not all, but enough to break the certainty of hate. The guards growled, uncertain now, their eyes flicking to the restless crowd. The human's voice rose again, his words sharp as steel. "You laugh at her shame, but you should be ashamed. You call her Nothing, but today she has shown more courage in silence than you have in cruelty. And if one coat, one human hand is enough to shake your world, then perhaps it is your world that is weak. The girl's tears fell silently, but they were no longer tears of fear. She stared at him, her chest aching with something new. Hope, fierce and burning. For the first time, she believed she was worth saving, worth fighting for. The guards lowered their weapons slightly, their faces uncertain. The crowd, once a storm of hate, now rippled with doubt. Some still shouted, but their voices no longer carried the same strength. The human's defiance had cracked the storm. He turned his head slightly, speaking to the girl without looking back. "Stay behind me," he said softly. "You are safe." Her hands tightened around the coat, her voice trembling but clear at last. "I believe you." The words were small, but they struck like thunder in the silence. The girl had found her voice, fragile but alive. The human smiled faintly, his stance never breaking. Together, they faced the storm. One coat, one voice, one stand of warmth. And though the night ahead held no promises, though danger still lingered in every shadow, the girl knew her life had changed forever, for she was no longer the mocked, the stripped, the shivering child of the market. She was someone worth saving, someone seen, someone wrapped not only in a coat but in dignity. The storm of voices would rage again. But now, there was a new voice among them, the voice of defiance, of hope, of humanity. And in that firelit shelter, the girl leaned into the coat, her heart beating with strength she had never known, because one human had chosen to stand, and sometimes one stand is enough to change everything.